no longer. Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, sports betting, it's a big deal, and it could become a reality in Pennsylvania. I got someone who's been covering the story on that for some time, and then former Senator John Pippy comes on. We'll get a quick energy update, and we'll do that after these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, it's called fantasy sports, and I must tell you, I have no clue what this is about. That's why joining me is Wallace McKelvey. He's a reporter with the Harrisburg Patriot News PennLive, and he's been all over this. He's been covering this story. And Wallace, I think you would agree, we live in a big sports state. I mean, let's be honest. We got the Eagles, we have the Steelers, we have the Penguins, we have the Flyers. And if you live in South Central Pennsylvania, you could root for some Baltimore teams. Do I got that right?
I have quite a few friends who are fans of the Ravens.
Fans of the Ravens, yeah. So we get the point. This is a big, and how could we not mention Penn State and all the great college teams that we have? And there's a lot of sports betting goes on. And before I delve into this aspect of it called fantasy sports, and that's why we're doing this, to try to bring some background to it, I want to say as we tape this, we're not quite sure yet what could happen in the Pennsylvania legislature. But what Wallace is going to do is get into the details of it so you understand it. It's a big deal. It's important. There's activity going on in other states. So before I do this, we have 12 casinos in this state. The last time there was any major change in the gaming laws concerned small games of chance, right?
Yeah.
Explain that. Talk about that.
Well, these are the games that help support organizations like VFWs and American Legions, the kind of the tear-off slips that you see in a lot of social clubs. And these essentially have helped these organizations stay afloat. They help balance their books, give them a little kind of slush fund of available income.
Bring in some people too, right?
Yeah, that too. Yeah, I mean, especially with VFWs, I've talked to quite a few people in the veterans organizations who say that, their membership is flagged off. They have difficulty getting new people in the door.
Right.
And so, this kind of helps balance the books for the VFWs who have shrank in the last few decades.
But surprising, the reports that I read, you're the expert on this, it's not raised the kind of money that people thought it would raise, right?
Well,
is that somewhat disappointing, I would think?
Honestly, that's true of a lot of things when it comes to gaming. The promises that are made up front, the estimates for how much revenue will be brought in, inevitably, they never quite meet expectations. And so that's a big issue. The other part is the infrastructure behind the small games of chance. Earlier this year, one of the American Legions in our areas came to me with saying that the amount of paperwork that they have to do behind the scenes on these small games of chance, recording all the details.
So it's overwhelming, these small.
Yeah, especially if you've got an organization that has maybe a few dozen members, maybe 100.
Good point.
And the guys who are doing all the recording work, or girls, aren't necessarily. This is not their full-time job. This is a part-time thing.
So maybe it needs streamlined. But now let's go to, first of all, when you hear the term fantasy sports, what's that mean? We're going to go through this. I mean, I have no idea what it means.
Well, first you need to know a little bit of background. It's not entirely dissimilar to the office polls that people have had for decades.
And still have, right?
And still have, yeah. I mean, it's like the thing that you gather around the water cooler, and you have these small leagues amongst yourselves. There's a TV show, I think it's still on the air, called The League, that has the same kind of deal. Except this is online. There are two main websites called FanDuel and DraftKings. And honestly, if you haven't heard of them, you must be living under a rock, because there was this study this recent study that came out that found at one point this year, there is a national TV ad for one of these two companies every 90 seconds in America.
I saw the ad,
Yeah.
but I was clueless. I mean, I presumed you got online and you bet on big events. Is that right?
Well, so what you go, it gives you even more options than your standard pool, like your standard office fantasy pool. You can pick players from multiple teams, put them into hypothetical situations. You can do virtually anything that comes to your mind on these websites. Bet virtually any amount of money within limits. And the whole selling point is that you put in $45 and you could become a millionaire. That is what they put out in their press materials.
Oh, yeah.
I
got it. Well, look, hold your thought. We're going to run to a break. This is really fascinating. I've never done this. I don't think I'm going to try it. I'm not, well, we're going to get into how it becomes legal and all of that. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Wallace McKelvey joins me. He's with the Harrisburg Patriot News and PennLive. He's an expert. I can tell now. He's covered and written a lot of stories about sports betting in the state, what's called fantasy sports, the one we're talking about. Things that I just learned about, DraftKings and FanDuel. They're two websites where you can go on and do some betting. Is it legal in Pennsylvania right now?
It is legal across the country.
Across the country.
Across the country. Now, in order to understand how this all came about, you have to go back maybe a decade or so. Do you remember back in the late 90s and early 2000s, there were all these online gaming sites that many of them were located overseas. All of them, like most of them were not really legal. But they sprang up because the internet was out there and it was something new that people could do.
And you could live in Harrisburg or Pittsburgh or Philly or wherever and gamble on those sites that were based abroad, right?
Based abroad. You didn't know where they were based. They could be based in Monaco. They could be based in Libya. And that led to problems. That led to a lot of criticism and concern because there were no real standard regulation for these websites. Things where you could play poker online. So you didn't know where your money was going, and this became an even bigger concern after 9/11 because the concern tying back to terrorism.
Sure.
So in 2006, there was this crackdown on the online gaming industry, and this it was called the Unlawful International Gambling Enforcement Act. And this essentially created the framework that ultimately led to fantasy sports. There was a carve-out in the language of this law, which basically was creating this basically putting the damper on online gaming in the United States. But at the same time, language in it would seem to have allowed the fantasy sports betting. And this is what places like FanDuel and DraftKings have pointed to.
Moved in to fill the void.
Yeah, this is the rationale for existing. And so they're very careful about the language that they use. What they say is that we are games of skill. It requires skill to bet on fantasy sports because you have to have all the stats.
So it's not a game of chance, they say.
Yeah, they say it's not a game of chance.
Well, how does the state come into regulating it? I noticed that that out in Las Vegas, or out in Arizona, I guess Las Vegas, they said none of this until it's done through the casinos. Can each state decide for itself if it wants to permit its residents to participate?
A number of states are looking into regulating this industry because of some of the recent scandals. If you remember, last month there was an issue where an employee, I believe, of FanDuel was an employee of DraftKings was competing in FanDuel tournaments and he apparently was using proprietary information to place bets. That became a major scandal within the industry.
I would think, right.
And out of that, you also saw the New York Attorney General saying that he wanted to regulate this industry, and at the same time, Nevada steps in and says, basically flat out bans the industry and says, if you want to participate in Nevada's gambling industry, you have to have a license to do so.
Basically go through the casino. Yeah, we have about a minute left. So in our state, what's going on with it?
In our state, we have this piece of legislation that would regulate the industry here.
Okay.
And more importantly, it would tie it to the casinos, the existing brick and mortar casinos. This legislation, which is still, I believe, in committee, or maybe will be by the time this airs, it would set up tournaments inside the casinos. And that's important because the casinos are looking for more revenue.
Yeah.
They are running up against issues with demographics.
Is there, before I let you go, is there any estimate about how many people? I mean, I just casually, when I'll run into people, you know, they've known over the years, and you know, they'll start talking about it, and I'm clueless about it. Is this pretty widespread?
There are probably people in your office who are doing it right now as you speak. Maybe even in the studio,
in the control room that are doing it.
There was an estimate recently by Ipsos that this year, 57 million new users in U.S. and Canada, and that is it's a 500% increase from 3 years ago.
Oh, gee. So I must be naive, because I just read a little bit about it. I read, of course, what you wrote, and I'm thinking this would be a good subject to introduce to our viewers. At any rate, thanks for coming in. We'll see what happens. We'll get you back if it passes, and we'll see how we'll keep it up. All right, former Senator John Pippy joins me. We're going to have a quick energy update, and we'll be back after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania, and by the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, representing companies involved in America's most affordable, reliable energy source. To learn more, visit pacoalalliance.com.
Welcome back. Joining me is former Senator John Pippy. He's the CEO of the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance. We're going to get into an energy update. We were talking just before we went on. You know, this sports betting is, I didn't realize, I mean, maybe I'm naive. This is a big deal, isn't it?
It really is. And now, actually, I don't do it either.
I don't either.
But my brother, all my friends, they talk about it every week. And it's, you know, and they don't put a lot of money down, but they say, you know, you can hit it big. You know, some of them have won a couple $100s. And, and now they're addicted to it. But it's, it is amazing.
And it probably does need to be regulated, doesn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, a former senator, you know.
I will tell you, here's the issue. The control mechanisms associated with that. If you know the difference between the internet and bricks and mortar, the way we treat it isn't fair. If you're a bricks and mortar guy, you go through all these regulations. If you're an internet guy, there's none. So either we have to deregulate the bricks and mortar guys, or we need to have a balance
to create a.
And the state needs some money, so don't forget that's in their mind. Colorado loves marijuana right now because of the revenue.
Yep. Well, that's off the subject.
I know.
But I think it's important. And look, you're a former state senator. You had to deal with a lot of these issues when you were in the Senate as well. And I think getting it right is important. But you make a great point that if we're going to have competition, you know, the playing field has to be equal, right?
Right. That's really what people ask for.
All right. Well, let's talk about coal and clean coal and the clean power plan that is out there, and the fact that, you know, even though we don't have yet the register, you know, the Federal Register yet has not published the work rules right.
Well, they actually just published it last month. They finally did that.
They finally did that. Go ahead. So what's the whole point?
So the greenhouse gas rule that the federal government has proposed, they call Clean Power Plan, deals with regulating CO2. Now, they put the plan was submitted to the Federal Register on October 23rd. Okay. And that's crucial because when that happens, then all these people who are very frustrated with the process so far can file a lawsuit. Because until it's in the Federal Register, you can't file a lawsuit. So now, since it's been put in the Federal Register on October 23rd, 27 of the 47 states that are regulated under this have filed lawsuits. Only 3 aren't: Hawaii, Vermont, and Alaska. I already mentioned 27 states that they represent over 60% of the nation's generating capacity. Pennsylvania is not one of them, by the way.
Before we go on, what's the plan say that is of concern to the industry?
In 7 seconds, the plan requires us to reduce CO2 emissions to levels that aren't, in our mind, and based on technology, aren't achievable with current technology and would be devastating to our economy and wouldn't make much difference. Their own numbers say it would have less than a 0.01% impact on total temperatures. So you're going to have all this pain with no appreciable environmental gain, and the reason why is because by 2017, coal will be the #1 source of energy. So if you're going to have less than a 1% impact on global CO2 emissions, because the rest of the world is growing and urbanizing and developing, why are we going to spend anywhere from EPA's own numbers of $8 billion a year to the chamber numbers of over $50 billion a year in cost, when we're already on a path to significantly reduce emissions? If we don't pass the Clean Power Plan, or if it doesn't go into effect, here in Pennsylvania, you'll see already over a 22% reduction in CO2. That's through competition and technology.
So 22%, you would argue, will take place without the plan.
Right.
And that's, go ahead, finish.
But with the plan, they want us to get to 42. And that's the problem, is that the steps to get from where we are now to where they want us to go, 42 from 2005, 35 from 2012. It's very technical.
And you would argue the technology isn't there. Is it being worked on?
It's being worked on, but anyone who's involved with it will show you that you're looking at least 10 to 15 years before you have carbon capture and sequestration. And then you don't even talk about the viability, the usage, the infrastructure associated with it. So we believe you need a more logical approach. And that's why over 80% or 24 trade associations have filed lawsuit representing 80% of our country's economy, and 3 labor unions representing over 878,000 union members. So this isn't a partisan issue at all.
All right, when we come back, I'm going to ask the senator about some other aspects of this, particularly how much coal plays a role in the economy of the state, something that I think we need to be aware of. We'll be back in a minute.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Business Council and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation.
All right, welcome back. I'm talking with former State Senator John Pippy from the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance. We're talking about energy, obviously the Coal Alliance's positions on these matters. Talk in general about energy in our state. The several sources. Give us a breakdown of where the energy comes from.
Well, if you look at Pennsylvania's energy portfolio, how we make electricity, 1/3 comes from coal, about 36%. 1/3 comes from nuclear, usually between 35, 36%. And then in the high 20s, you have natural gas. And if you add those together, that's 95%. Then you have 1% for wind, and about 0.5% for solar, and then about 2% or so for waste and hydro and some other, all the others, the eaches. So 95% comes from coal, nuclear and natural gas, and then the other 5
now,
from renewables.
I hear all the time, and we've had folks on this program over 18 years that talked about us being an energy exporter. Is that correct?
Yes, we're number 2 energy exporter in the nation.
In the whole nation?
And part of that is because, and I'll give them credit, is previous administrations didn't join RGGI. I don't know if you remember, Governor Rendell said, no, we're not going to join the Northeast. And because we didn't join the Northeast Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, our electricity rates on average about 30% lower than them. So now people make energy here and we export it everywhere else. And so it's a job creator. And so we don't want to lose that. We can grow renewables, we can grow natural gas, we can maintain our coal presence and our nuclear presence because the world needs energy, but we have to do it balanced. And if this rule goes through, coal could see anywhere from a 25 at the top and to almost a 60% reduction in utilization. And how are we going to make that up is a big question.
Now, Congress is making an effort to prevent the implementation of the rule. Is that correct?
Right. They've actually just recently they've passed a couple bills that would defund the activity as it relates to a clean power plan right now. So the agencies associated for implementing and continuing this rule wouldn't have their funding. And that's a tool that they've used in the past. And the reason they're doing that is the federal government in particular and some state governments are being super aggressive. Usually this requires congressional input. This takes a dozen years to develop a nation's generational energy policy. This administration wants to do it in less than 2, which is just unheard of.
Yeah. And the president has said he will veto any effort to modify the rule. Is that correct?
Exactly. And so the only tool or mechanism that Congress has is the power of the purse.
All right. So where does all this go? Looking ahead. I mean, how many jobs yet now are produced by coal? And I know you know all this off the top of your
head. In coal,
head.
we're looking at about 36,000 jobs in the state and about $4.5 billion in economic activity. If you and I were doing this interview 2 years ago, I would have told you 41,000 and $7 billion. So we've already seen a lot of coal-fired power generation go offline, over 5,000 megawatts. So it's a big number.
And is most of it out in the southwestern part of the state? And is there still any up in the northeastern part, or in both?
Pennsylvania's unique in that we have, as you just said, in the southwest we have bituminous coal, which is 80% goes to the power generation, and the rest goes to steel making. And then anthracite in the northeast.
We learned that in the 8th grade, by the way, when we were in school.
And anthracite, and anthracite's a harder, more dense coal that has some wonderful qualities. In Pennsylvania, it's about 7 million tons a year. For bituminous, we're about 60 million tons a year.
Yeah. So overall, in conclusion, before I let you go, this is something that your association is going to weigh in and go ahead.
Very much so. What we're saying is we just need to do what most states are doing, which is taking the full 3 years to develop a strategy and also see what's going on with the legal challenges. So we'll work it.
Thanks for coming in. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.